Hello and welcome to my video about a large MOD composite restoration. This situation is kind of like if you had a large amalgam restoration, the patient had a crack in it, you had to remove it, but they didn't want a full coverage crown. So this is an alternative methodology to it. I'm going to use the single-handed ligation methodology here to tighten around the tooth because they do have a deep distal and proximal box, or mesial box. And I'm going to try to keep that rubber dam down in the gingiva as low as possible. I'm doing a selective etch technique where I only etch the enamel and not the dentin, so to help avoid sensitivity, post-operative sensitivity, and also we have a self-etching primer, so it allows us to do this. 20 seconds on the enamel, followed by a thorough rinse. Here's our self-etch and primer in one. This does not get cured, but it does get air thinned. And finally, the bonding resin. This is to be painted on for 10 seconds and it should be dried until it no longer is mobile or until it's completely dry. Once that is complete, you want to cure for 10 seconds. We're using the Garrison sectional matrix system. I've had some troubles with it with these typodont teeth, but I think this went pretty well this time. And the camera cut out, so I made the distal marginal ridge prior to and while the camera was cut out, so we kind of missed that part of the video. But here's the mesial marginal ridge. Now, I generally like to cut the Garrison rings or the Garrison matrix bands to make it very, very close to the marginal ridge of the proximal tooth. However, in this case, it looked to me to be about maybe 1.5 millimeters above, which is still a little bit high. I want it to be like 1 millimeter or less, but I kind of went with it. Here I am just trying to build up that marginal ridge. I'm using an A3.5 shade, which is darker than the tooth, but I'm hoping to bring it back lighter with the enamel shade at the end. Again, trying to build up that marginal ridge. Another A3.5 shade layer. Now, this following step, I'm going to attempt to put an enamel shade as a final increment on the marginal ridge, but then I realize that I'm above the proximal tooth's marginal ridge, so I just tear it out, and I'm just realize I'm going to have a dark layer on that marginal side. I probably would have avoided that if I would have cut the matrix band down to about the exact height of the proximal tooth's marginal ridge. And next up, I realize I'm still a little high, so I'm going to use a 12 blade to try to remove some composite so I don't have to re-etch the composite by avoiding using my burr. Now I'm trying to do a lobule-based composite application. My goal is to place two balls of A3 at each cusp location, and then finally finish it up with an enamel shade, and then fill in the fosses with enamel. But I kind of ended up moving the composite to flush with the cavo surface on this mesiobuccal cusp. Why I did that, I'm not quite sure. It just seemed right at the time, and I kind of regret it later on. If I were to do this again, I think I would use a larger ball at the beginning just for time's sake, and I think I could still have a good looking tooth with a larger increment. Here again, I try to bring it flush with the composite or with the cavo surface, and that wasn't my goal starting this prep or this filling. Here I think I'm going to get tired of that large increment. And realize it's not exactly what I want to do. I'm going to tear it out again and try it again. Kind of go back to the original plan of doing lobes and small ball increments for each cusp. My goal with every composite restoration is just to build the tooth that I want and spend as little time finishing as possible. Now here you notice the two triangular ridges on the posterior or the distal kind of meet up with each other exactly, and that kind of gives a weird look to the tooth. So I kind of go back and bring that, with my next application, bring the mesial, or the buccal cusp triangular ridge a little bit to the mesial to give it a little bit more of a natural feel. If I could do this again, I wouldn't cure as much. I would try to build each cusp, add to each cusp before every cure session. Here I am adding enamel. At the end of this tooth, it ended up being too dark, so I should have maybe made a larger increment of enamel or made the second increment of A3 smaller. I'm not sure exactly where I would change that, but I definitely would change it for the future. Here I am trying to bring that triangular ridge a little bit to the mesial just to give it more of a natural feel. Here I'm using that enamel to fill in those fossa. This turned out to be a little more difficult than I expected to get a nice solid fill. I actually found a void after recording, which displeased me a lot. So I ended up having to fill that back in again. So I'll have to be more careful about filling in those fossa with the enamel shade. Here we are about finished with the tooth. I'm really starting to like the way it looks. It's just a little bit rough and a little bit dark, but I think the function or the general form is very, very pleasing. And here I use a paintbrush. This just helps smooth out that last layer and make sure it's nice and smooth and won't be catching any bacteria for the patient in the near future. And one final cure, and there's the tooth. It needed a little bit of flaking, and if there's a few flakes that kind of need to be scraped off, and a little bit of finishing and polishing, but I wasn't able to record those steps. But thank you for watching the video, and I hope you have a great day.